What happens if the US defaults? Debt ceiling and Joe Biden's non-serious attitude. The United States is the world's premier economy. What happens if this flagship economy defaults? Will it have global repercussions? What is the debt ceiling, and why did Joe Biden allow untenable fiscal pressure to reign freely over the US economy? In this video, we will talk about it all. What is the debt ceiling? What is a default? And what impact will such a crisis have on the global economy? So stay tuned. But before we continue further, I would request you to subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Alright, so let's start from the basics. What is the debt ceiling? Simply put, the debt ceiling is the restriction which Congress has put on the US federal government in terms of how much money it can borrow. This debt ceiling has been there since 1917, and Congress needs to revise that ceiling every time since the government always needs more money than it's making. It does not bode well for an expensive government, and the reason why our founders wanted a limited government in the first place. Okay, debt ceiling is, let's jump on the next question. What exactly is a default, and why is it such a dangerous thing? So, if the debt ceiling is not raised with the passage of time, then the government does not have the funds to make the necessary payments on time. This is what we call a default, and it has never happened before at such an unprecedented level, although we got a bit close to this situation in 2011. So, if the US does default, then the US will most likely enter into a recession, and the consequences for the rest of the economy will be dire. So, we have to establish that raising the debt ceiling is really important for the economy to keep functioning. But then, such a pitched battle over raising the debt ceiling? That is a great question. The answer can be found in the gross level of political polarization, which has started to take root since late 90s and has reached an all-time high in our present situation. Every political party looks to score points, and those points always come at the expense of the incumbent party. However, without going too much into why we have political polarization, let's talk a little bit more about the default situation and implications for the global economy. Last week, when the top economic officials were discussing some of the most pressing economic concerns of the world, such as the dangers of economic recessions, climate change, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, there was another interesting agenda item on the discussion panel. What is exactly going on with the US debt ceiling? This question was directed to the Treasury Secretary Janet L. Yellen. Interestingly, everybody present at the table knew exactly the risks of the US economy hemorrhaging if there was a stalemate in negotiations between the White House and House Republicans. Yellen responded that everybody in the administration was aware of the grave risks posed by the default, the #1 priority for the federal government. The pressure was on President Biden as well, and rightly so, who had to cancel his planned tour of Australia and Papua New Guinea after the G7 summit. We'll discuss President Biden's role afterwards. Last week, the negotiations between the White House and House Republicans were paused. This was not good news for the financial markets, and investor trust was markedly lower because of that. Indeed, the idea of the biggest economy in the world grinding to a halt because of the default is not good news for the US market, or international markets either. But why would it be such a danger to other countries and their markets? The most straightforward reason is that almost every country in the world trades internationally in US dollars. If the country backing the USD defaults, then it deals a considerable damage to the value of the dollar. Since most foreign reserves, about 52% according to modest estimates, are maintained in US dollars, this would send quite a bit of shock to these countries. But what is even more strange is that the global powerhouse economy has a debt ceiling in the first place. Most economic experts have simply failed to understand why that is the case. The legislative battle over raising the debt ceiling, combined with the pernicious levels of polarization, poses an existential challenge to the US if only the political elite of this country cared enough. The issue could be resolved only if Biden and the White House Speaker Kevin McCarthy can come to an agreement before June 1st. President Biden had reportedly said that the international reputation of the US has been on the line. If the country were to default, it would send the US into a recession and risk millions of jobs, as well as cast a huge looming shadow over the reliability of the US Treasury Bonds, which are generally seen as safe investments. This is a dangerous outcome for other countries because most of their foreign currencies are hoarded in US dollars. Nations generally look to US Treasury Bonds to secure their economies and protect themselves against debt. This is why the US defaulting and not being able to raise its debt ceiling is such bad news for the rest of the world. The rest of the world cannot believe that the US can act in such an irresponsible way. Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, is reported to have said, "I just cannot believe that they would let such a major disaster happen if the United States defaulted on its debt." The notion was so outrageous that she continued to say, "This is not possible. I cannot believe this would happen." Economic experts have also aired similar sentiments. For instance, Eswar Prasad, an expert in international economics at Cornell University, said, "It is perceived as an extraordinarily high level of dysfunction in an economy that provides the largest number of safe assets to the world, and is in principle seen as the most important cog in the global financial system." Eswar continued to hone in on a key note. There is a real sense that the US doesn't pay much attention to the volatility and uncertainty it precipitates. That affects the rest of the world quite significantly. The dangers of the US economy faltering has more than just economic impact. The discussion on the US debt ceiling comes at a very critical moment in the Eastern European theater. If the US defaults, it would lead to a significant pullout of US financial assistance in Eastern Europe, which has seen a huge influx of immigrants from Ukraine due to Russia's invasion. A financially compromised US would leave its allies extremely vulnerable to Russia's influence. Similarly, the US's commitment to contain China's influence in the South China Sea could see a lot of reversal too. This would leave regional US allies somewhat exposed to expansionist Chinese designs. Yellen has echoed similar concerns. She has reported to have said, "The default would raise questions about our ability to defend our national security interests." Now, what role did President Biden play in this entire drama? Well, according to him, he is not to be blamed at all. In fact, he is reported to have dumped the entire blame on MAGA Republicans. He is so confident that he has said, "I've done my part. It's time for the other side to move their team positions because much of what they are proposing is simply, quite frankly, unacceptable." He also said, "On the merits based on what I have offered, I would be blameless." Now, Joe Biden has a lot of political experience, so I trust that he knows the pressure of governance is always on the incumbent party. The opposition has all the incentive to block the incumbent from performing. That is how the US politics has been structured. The merits that President Biden cannot simply dust off his clothes and walk away blameless if there is no deal between the US government and House Republican leadership. The onus is on him to get this deal done and save the US economy from falling into an endless abyss. Here's hoping that Biden and McCarthy can come to an arrangement. Please give this video a like if you found something of value from it. Thanks for watching till the end.